As he said, my name is Sadie Wyant. I am a senior graduating exactly 3 weeks from today. I'm an English major, and I'd like to talk to you today about my research in determining the nature of negative perceptions of Black English and its speakers. So, for a little bit of background, I had a class here at SWU that was Modern Grammar and Linguistics, and although the class ended up focusing mostly on the grammar aspect of language, because people kind of forget that part from high school, the few linguistics lectures that we had really sparked my interest in linguistics in general. And I also had the privilege to study abroad at Oxford University last fall for a semester. And through that experience, I was able to attend linguistics lectures, and I also had a tutorial in linguistic theory, and I wrote a seminar paper on linguistic profiling. So what is linguistic profiling? It's basically the auditory equivalent of racial profiling, and at this time I want to talk a little bit about the idea of standard English. We usually see in like professional norm of communication, you have to have a standard where you use proper grammar and no sort of accent, no colloquial slang such as y'all or things like that. And so I'm really focusing on non-standard dialects of English, specifically Black English. And so in some previous research, through 3 related studies, Purnell found that dialect identification is possible through telephone interviews and even just after hearing the word hello. And then Bao found through that possibility of identifying a dialect, the use of non-standard dialects leads to housing discrimination. So basically, he called different housing companies and asked, or real estate agencies, and asked if apartments available for rent, and he used multiple different dialects of English, including standard English, including Black English, and other non-standard dialects. And although the standard English caller was told that there was an availability, the non-standard dialects were told that there was not an availability. So that just sort of shows a correlation between the use of non-standard dialect and housing discrimination. So there are some basic characteristics of Black English that I want to talk about. First off, there are other terms for this dialect, such as African American English, African American Vernacular English, and Ebonics. But I want to give you a little explanation as to why I chose to use the term Black English, and that is mostly from the book that I read by John McWhorter, which is published in this year, and it's called Talking Back, Talking Black, Truths About America's Lingua Franca. And he explains that he doesn't like the term African American Vernacular English because he is talking about a standard speech, not just a vernacular, so not just the daily slang or anything like that. And he specifically says that Black Americans can sound identifiably Black even when they're grammatically correct in terms of a standard English. And he doesn't like the term African American English because the dialect has very little African influence. And he also refuses to use the term Ebonics just because it's not really a real word. It was sort of made up, and the reference to dark skin kind of eliminates or rejects the idea that it can be spoken by people that aren't Black. So there's the habitual marker B, which is used to indicate that something happens habitually, so it happens often. So an example sentence of this is, he be walking by every day. So that he, and along with the everyday in that sentence, shows that the he in the sentence is walking by consistently, habitually, every day. There's also the past tense done, and that is used to indicate the recent past. It's not something that you would use to talk about something that happened 10 years ago. But as this example sentence says, I done seen her yesterday. The speaker's talking about something that happened yesterday, saw her yesterday. There are other characteristics of the dialect, but I won't go into them now just because it's a lot. So for my methodology, I sent a survey via email to all, what I thought was all current students, faculty, and staff at Southern Wesleyan. So out of 2,626 emails that were sent, I had a total of 137 participants that completed the survey, and there are some underlying factors that I'll go into a little bit later. And at the beginning of my survey, I asked 7 demographic questions, but I'm going to focus mostly on the age, gender, and ethnicity questions that I asked participants. So for a little bit of the demographics of my participants, out of 137, 51 were male, 85 reported to being female, and there was 1 unreported response. As you can see from the age range up there, it's all in years, so 18 to 24 years, 25 to 34. And the highest number was in the 18 to 24 age range, so I would assume that mostly students took my survey, which is great. And the biggest thing about that demographic is that everybody reported something. So that was a category that I could use in my data analysis. And for ethnicity, I was slightly disappointed to see that out of 137 participants, 113 self-reported as being white. I really wanted to get some diversity to be able to see if there was a difference in perceptions based on your ethnicity, your ethnic background. So that really limited my data analysis, but big deal. So to continue, I had 12 audio clips that I selected from YouTube videos, Facebook videos, as well as the University of Georgia's Linguistic Atlas Project database. And of those 12, I had 8 male and 4 female speakers. And so I found these clips online, and then I used Real Player to pull them off of the internet, and then they were in an MP4 file, so they were a video file. I trimmed them as much as I possibly could within that software, and then converted them to an MP3, opened them in another program called Audacity to trim that even further because it was easier to get really specific with my trimming, and people talk really quickly. I talk very quickly. And within seconds, you can have whole sentences that I didn't necessarily need for the clip. And I sometimes had to then again put the file into another software called Camtasia, and I used that to, if there was any background noise in the clips, just because some people have music in their YouTube videos, and I used that to reduce noise and also to trim it even further if I needed to. And it's still in an MP3 file, but my survey tool required a video file to be able to embed the clip in the survey. So I had to convert it again to an MP4 through a software called Magic, and it was a demo version. And so I was able to create a waveform, which is basically like the visual of the sound. So it was like the waves of people talking. And yeah, that was fun, lots of hard work. But it was kind of cool to use, I'm using 4 different softwares to do one thing. It's great. So I'm going to give you a little example of some of my audio that was in the surveys. And some of you may have taken the survey, but this is just another refresher of things I listened to multiple times.
That's not fair.
So that was clip 12, and I just have them numbered based on the order in which I found them and the order in which they were incorporated into the survey. So the numbers don't really mean anything. They're just there for my sanity.
Because that's like a sense of family, you know what I'm saying? It's like, that's what determines the line, you know what I'm saying? If we're real close, then we're at liberty to talk like that because we understand each other.
That's only in the morning. He's supposed to be up cooking breakfast for somebody, and so that's like an alarm clock.
So you can see that's the waveform. So this is exactly how it looked to participants when they were taking the survey.
If I wasn't, go in there and ask them, how many times have I ran? Every time they done call, I come. I come for anything.
And this is the last one.
What it really should be about, are you happy? Literally, do you feel fulfilled in life? Do you feel like you found your purpose and you living in your purpose?
So you can see some of them were a little bit shorter, some of them were a little bit longer. But that's what participants listened to, and then they answered questions based on that. I apologize, I did not tell you the questions that I asked. Yeah, let me say that real quickly. So there are 12 clips, and I asked 5 questions on for each clip. And these questions ask participants to rate the approachability, education level, ethnicity, social class, and trustworthiness of the speaker. And so I tried to use those in my data analysis. So for my results, I attempted to analyze the data based on the 3 different categories that I spoke on earlier, so the reported age, gender, and ethnicity of participants. However, due to a small sample size, I was limited in my ability to analyze based on the ethnicity, and so the age category is the one that will be used for this discussion, just because all participants reported an age. And so I analyzed my data using JASP, J-A-S-P. It's a free statistical software that Dr. Couch introduced me to. And I basically took formatted Excel spreadsheets of the data and divided them into each of the 5 questions, and that showed a number of each of the participant responses. And those were then converted into JASP, and I created contingency tables, which basically is a fancy word for I compared like age versus approachability. So the age of the participant versus how they responded to the question on approachability or trustworthiness or the education level question. So for a little bit more about my results, I found that the approachability and trustworthiness questions, they had 4 possible answers. So for example, with approachability, participants had 4 options: very unapproachable, somewhat unapproachable, somewhat approachable, and very approachable. So I tried to eliminate a neutral response just to get the gut reaction of positive or negative. But what I found was that the highest number of participants and the highest percentage rated almost every single clip with what I call a neutral positive response. So they either said somewhat approachable or somewhat trustworthy. And the exception to this was clip 12, which if you remember was the first one I played. That's not fair, is what she's saying. And my assumption would be that this could have been due to the content and the tone of voice. She sounds angry, she's saying that something's not fair, and so that could have led to the perception that she was, and more participants rated her as being somewhat unapproachable than somewhat approachable. So it was just 1 notch down, but I found that interesting. And with the education level question, there are 5 possible responses. So participants could have rated speakers as having no education, little education, some education, as being educated, or highly educated. And I found that the highest percentage rated most of the clips as having some education, so some college. And the exceptions to this were clips 5, 6, 8, and 7. So this, you probably can't even read that. I apologize. But it's not a big deal. I'll tell you exactly what you need to know off that slide. So this is clip 5, and I'm going to play it for you again just so you remember a little bit what he's talked about.
Because that's like a sense of family, you know what I'm saying? It's like, that's what determines the line, you know what I'm saying? If we're real close, then we're at liberty to talk like that because we understand each other.
So 53 participants, so 38%, perceived the speaker as having little education, so a high school diploma or less. And though this is just above the 33% who answered some education, I still thought it was really interesting because there was no use of Black English in the clip that I could find. And the only thing I could maybe think of is the repetition of the phrase, you know what I'm saying, could indicate that the speaker is having an informal conversation, which when we're having informal conversations, we're not exactly going to sound as educated as we may possibly be. So that could have led to that perception. But I did find that interesting, and that maybe might go back to what McWhorter said earlier with people can just sound identifiably Black even when they're not using specific characteristics of that dialect. And so clip 6, let me play that one for you one more time.
That's only in the morning. He supposed to be up cooking breakfast or somebody, and so that's like an alarm clock.
So 67% of participants rated this man as having little education, so the same as the previous. But what I found is there's more use of Black English in this clip. So he dropped the auxiliary verb when he said "we up cooking breakfast," and the R sound. I didn't speak on this earlier because it's a little more complicated. But basically, the R sound in the word "morning" was eliminated, and so that is another characteristic of Black English. So that could suggest a potential correlation between the use of Black English and the perception that the speaker is less educated. For clip 7, though, I'm going to play here one more time.
What it really should be about, are you happy? Literally, do you feel fulfilled in life? Do you feel like you found your purpose and you living in your purpose?
So this speaker was given the highest education rating of every single clip, no matter gender, ethnicity of the speaker, anything, highest one that was given to any single clip. And 48% of participants rated this clip as being educated, or the speaker as being educated, so earning an associate or bachelor's degree. There was one instance of Black English in the clip, so she says, "you living in your purpose." She dropped that auxiliary verb. And what I could think of is this perception of higher education could have been related to the content. She's talking about living in purpose, finding your purpose, being happy. And so that's something that I don't know personally the education level of the speaker, but it's something that could have led to the perception that she was more educated than some of the others. So for my research limitations, the survey tool was a big limitation. First off, time, though. As previously said, the honors program is meant to be completed in 2 years, so starting in the first semester of junior year and ending the last semester of the senior year. However, because I studied abroad the first semester of my junior year, I had to start this past spring and finish it now. So that was a big limitation. I was on a time crunch a lot of the time. And due to the time limit, I was unable to apply for external grants. So that led to my survey tool, and I used a site called Question Pro, and that one seemed like the best option for what I was looking for. I could add audio, I could format questions the way I wanted them to be. But though I wanted to have a time limit for every single question, that was unavailable with the license that I had purchased for the site. So I had to do a time limit for the entire survey. The reason I wanted to have that time limit for each question is to really get participants' gut response to a speaker, to really know what the true perception is. So having an all-encompassing time limit could have led to, more time to really think about how you think about something, and so that could have affected things. There was also some technical difficulties with the survey tool. Question Pro required that the browser of the participant had the most updated Adobe Flash Player installed, and because I sent this out via email, it was not possible for me to really control if people had this installed on their computers. And so if it wasn't installed or it wasn't running, it wasn't given permission to run, the survey wouldn't work. And so that's why I think I had such a small sample size. If I looked at the site, it showed me how many people actually started versus how many people completed. And there was a big difference. So availability of audio, that was another big limitation. And that also goes back to my time constraint. It was difficult to find neutral audio clips. I didn't want to have people who were talking about, what they do for a living, or saying profanity or anything like that. So it was difficult to find things that were similar, but also not identifiable. And that, led to, I think, some of the discrepancy in perceptions with certain people being rated as being less educated or more educated than maybe they possibly were. There was also a lack of previous research, and I found this especially when I was trying to formulate my questions. I wanted to find previous studies that had been done so that I could replicate the questions that they had used and increase that validity. However, most of the studies that I tried to that I got their questions were unrelated to my specific topic. For example, there was one that the study was looking at dialect identification or the identification of dialect among adults with high-functioning autism. So that's completely different from what I was trying to do here. So with all of these limitations come opportunities for further research. Improving a survey tool and distributing it differently, instead of maybe sending out an email, having a lab setting where people come in and sit at a computer instead of you doing it on their own time, or just modifying the survey tool could lead to a larger sample size, and a larger, more diverse sample size would, affect my analysis and could create a more expanded analysis that would be able to be done. And also consistency in dialogue. Instead of pulling random clips off of the internet, conducting semi-structured interviews of diverse people could have led to, or could lead to a better research in general. Just having, if you have an interview where people are talking about certain things and they're all related things, then it would decrease that perception based on content or stuff like that. So these are my references. And I would like to thank my research committee, specifically my mentor, Dr. Paul Schleifer, as well as Dr. White, Dr. Hayduck, and Dr. Stubblefield. I'd also like to thank Dr. Dale Couch, who is the chair of the honors program, and Professor Emily Germain for allowing me to sit in her office and complain and cry and ask tons and tons of questions, because I'm an English major in the humanities. We don't do social science research. And I also would like to thank Dr. William Kretschmar and the Linguistic Society of the University of Georgia, who helped me a lot. I presented at one of their conferences, and they helped me think of more ideas for further research, as well as Dr. Kretschmar connected me to the Linguistic Atlas Project. And I'd also like to thank my friends and family for supporting me through all of this. Any questions?